The bullet shattered the classroom window 3 seconds before Naledi Mabeso hit the floor, her lecture notes scattering like confetti across blood-streaked linoleum. And in that frozen moment between life and death, she locked eyes with the one student who didn't flinch, the one who moved toward the danger instead of away from it, the beautiful Korean boy who had been watching her with something far more dangerous than admiration for the past 6 months. Kim Jae-hyun caught her before her head cracked against the desk leg, his body covering hers as another round of gunfire peppered the university's second-floor humanities building, and Naledi felt his heart hammering against her back, felt the hard press of something metallic against her ribs that definitely wasn't part of a student's usual accessories. He was wearing a gun to her Renaissance literature class. "Stay down, Professor," Jae-hyun whispered against her ear, his accent thicker than usual, his breath warm and urgent. "They're here for me, not you, but they won't care about collateral damage. Before we continue, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment your country. I love knowing how far these stories travel." Naledi Mabeso had spent 42 years building a life of careful respectability, a life that made sense in all the ways that mattered to a black South African woman who had clawed her way from Soweto to a doctorate in comparative literature, who had earned her professorship at Seoul National University through brilliance and relentless determination, who had left behind a failed marriage and a daughter studying medicine in Cape Town to chase something that felt like freedom in a country that didn't know her story, didn't carry her scars, didn't expect anything from her except excellence. She had not spent those 42 years becoming someone worthy of respect only to throw it away on a 21-year-old student with a face that belonged in a Korean drama and eyes that looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. But Kim Jae-hyun made it very difficult to remember why that mattered. He had walked into her Women in Renaissance Literature seminar on the first day of the fall semester, late by exactly 7 minutes, and every head in the classroom had turned to watch him settle into the back row with the kind of fluid grace that suggested he was used to being watched, used to being wanted. He was beautiful in that specific way that Korean men could be, all sharp jawline and perfect skin and black hair that fell across his forehead like it had been styled by someone who understood the architecture of desire. But it was his eyes that had made Naledi's breath catch, dark and intelligent and fixed on her with an intensity that felt almost predatory. She had ignored him for 3 weeks, called on every other student, pretended not to notice when his hand went up, told herself that the flutter in her stomach was indigestion and not something far more dangerous. On the 4th week, he had stayed after class, approached her desk with that careful, controlled walk, and said in perfect English, "Professor Mabeso, I read your paper on the intersection of race and gender in Othello, the one published in the Journal of Shakespeare Studies last year, and I found your argument about Desdemona's agency fascinating, but I think you underestimated how much she understood about the danger she was courting." Naledi had looked up from her papers, had found herself caught in those dark eyes, and had made her first mistake. She had smiled. "Most students don't read beyond the assigned syllabus, Mr. Kim," she had said, keeping her voice professionally neutral even as something warm and unwelcome unfurled in her chest. "What made you seek out my work?" "I wanted to understand how you think," he had replied, and the honesty in his voice had been more dangerous than any flirtation. "You see patterns that other people miss, connections between power and desire that most scholars ignore, and I need to learn how to do that." "Why?" she had asked, and even then, some instinct had whispered that this was not a normal student seeking academic guidance. "Because the world I come from doesn't forgive people who can't read the subtext," he had said, and then he had smiled, and Naledi had felt something shift in the careful architecture of her life, some foundation stone coming loose. "And because you're brilliant, Professor, and I've never been able to resist brilliant women." She should have shut it down right there, should have reminded him about appropriate boundaries between students and faculty, should have recognized the warning signs of a young man who was too confident, too intense, too interested in a woman twice his age. Instead, she had said, "My office hours are Tuesdays and Thursdays, 2 to 4, if you'd like to discuss the coursework in more depth." And Jae-hyun had said, "I'll be there," with the certainty of someone who had never been told no, and Naledi had watched him leave and wondered what the hell she had just invited into her life. He came to every office hour for the next 2 months, always with questions that went deeper than the syllabus required, always with insights that showed a mind far more sophisticated than most graduate students possessed, and slowly, inexorably, the professional distance between them began to erode in ways that Naledi knew were dangerous but couldn't quite bring herself to stop. They talked about Shakespeare and Cervantes, and the ways that literature could be a map to understanding power, and sometimes their knees would touch under her desk, and neither of them would move away. They debated the nature of transgressive love in Renaissance poetry, and Jaehyun would watch her mouth while she spoke, his gaze so heated that Naledi felt it like a physical touch. They discussed her research on post-colonial interpretations of European classics, and he would ask questions about her life in South Africa, about what it meant to carry the weight of her history into academic spaces that had never been designed for people who looked like her, and his genuine interest felt more intimate than any physical contact could have been. "You're not like other professors," he said one Thursday afternoon in late October, rain streaking the windows of her office, the campus settling into that particular kind of autumn gloom that Seoul did so well. "You don't perform your authority, you simply inhabit it, and everyone around you has no choice but to acknowledge it. That's a survival skill, not a personality trait," Naledi replied, trying to keep her voice light even as her pulse kicked up at the way he was looking at her, like she was a puzzle he was determined to solve. "Women who look like me don't get the benefit of the doubt in academic spaces, Mr. Kim, so we learn to command respect before anyone can question our right to be there." "Jae-hyun," he said, leaning forward in the chair across from her desk, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that probably cost more than her monthly salary. "When we're alone like this, I'd like you to call me Jae-hyun." "That wouldn't be appropriate," she said, but her voice came out softer than she'd intended, and she saw the way his eyes darkened at the sound. "Professor Mabeso," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her spine straighten, something that sounded almost like pain. "May I ask you a personal question?" "That depends on the question," she replied, already knowing that she should say no, already knowing that whatever he was about to ask would cross a line they couldn't uncross. "Do you feel it too?" he asked, his voice low and urgent, his hands gripping the arms of his chair like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. "This thing between us, this pull, do you feel it, or am I losing my mind?" Naledi stood up abruptly, walked to the window, put distance between them, even though every cell in her body wanted to close it, wanted to lean into the heat of him and stop pretending that she didn't notice the way the air changed when he entered a room. "Mr. Kim," she said, forcing steel into her voice, "you are my student, I am your professor, and you are young enough to be my son, which means that whatever you think you're feeling is simply a misplaced admiration that will fade as soon as you're out of my class and back in the company of women your own age." "I'm 21, not 12, he said, standing up as well, moving to stand behind her but not touching, not yet. "And you're 42, not 80, and age is just a number when two people connect the way we do." "You don't know anything about me," she said, but her voice shook, betraying her. "I know that you take your coffee black with 2 sugars, that you have a daughter in Cape Town who's studying to be a doctor, that you listen to Miriam Makeba when you're grading papers, that you wear that small gold cross because your grandmother gave it to you before she died, that you massage your left wrist when you're stressed because you broke it in a protest in Johannesburg in 1998 and it never healed quite right, and that every time I walk into your classroom, you look at me for exactly 3 seconds longer than you look at any other student, and in those 3 seconds, I see everything you're trying to hide." Naledi turned to face him, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat, and found him standing closer than she'd realized, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "How do you know all of that?" she whispered. "Because I pay attention to everything about you," he said simply. "Because you've become the most important thing in my world, and I don't know how to stop it, and I don't think I want to." "Jae-hyun," she said, and saying his name felt like surrender, felt like stepping off a cliff. "This can't happen. You understand that, don't you? Even if I felt the same way, which I'm not saying I do, the ethics violation alone would cost me my career. And you're a student, you're so young, you have your whole life ahead of you, and I'm a middle-aged woman with stretch marks and gray hair that I die in a past that's complicated in ways you can't imagine." "I don't care about any of that," he said, and he lifted his hand like he was going to touch her face, but stopped himself at the last moment, his fingers hovering in the air between them. "I don't care about your age, I don't care about the rules, I don't care about anything except the fact that when I'm with you, I feel like I can finally breathe, like there's finally someone in this world who sees me and not just the performance I put on for everyone else." "What performance?" she asked, because there was something in his voice that suggested depths she hadn't guessed at, shadows behind the beautiful facade. "The performance of being Kim Jae-hyun, perfect student, dutiful son, acceptable heir," he said, and there was bitterness in his voice now, an edge of something dark and complicated. "The performance of pretending that I have a choice in how my life unfolds." "What does that mean?" she asked, but before he could answer, his phone buzzed in his pocket, and the moment shattered. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his entire body went rigid, his jaw clenching, his eyes going cold in a way that transformed him from an earnest student into something else entirely, something harder and more dangerous. "I have to go," he said, his voice flat. "Family matter." "Jae-hyun," she said, reaching out instinctively, her hand landing on his arm, and she felt the tension vibrating through him like an electric current. "Is everything okay?" He looked down at her hand on his arm, then back up at her face, and the heat in his eyes made her breath catch. "No," he said quietly. "Nothing is okay, Professor, and it hasn't been for a very long time, but being here with you, talking to you like this, it's the closest I've come to okay in years." And then he left, and Naledi stood in her office, her hand still tingling from where she'd touched him, and wondered what the hell she had gotten herself into. The truth came 3 days later, on a Monday morning when Jae-hyun didn't show up for class, and Naledi told herself that the knot of worry in her stomach was simply professorial concern and not something far more personal and terrifying. By Wednesday, when he still hadn't appeared and hadn't responded to her emails, she was genuinely frightened, imagining everything from illness to accident to the possibility that he had simply decided to drop her course to avoid the complicated tension between them. On Thursday, she found out the real reason for his absence, and it was so much worse than any of her imaginings. She was in her office, grading midterm papers and trying not to think about dark eyes and dangerous confessions, when her department chair, Professor Lee, knocked on her door with an expression that suggested bad news. "Naledi," Professor Lee said, settling into the chair across from her desk, the same chair where Jae-hyun usually sat. "I need to talk to you about one of your students." "Which student?" she asked, but her heart already knew. "Kim Jae-hyun," Professor Lee said, and Naledi felt her stomach drop. "His family has requested that he be excused from classes for the next 2 weeks due to a family emergency, and they've asked that we make arrangements for him to complete his coursework remotely." "What kind of family emergency?" Naledi asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. Professor Lee hesitated, clearly weighing what she could and couldn't say, and then leaned forward with the air of someone about to share confidential information. "Naledi, how much do you know about Jae-hyun's family?" "Nothing really," Naledi admitted. "He doesn't talk about them." "That's probably wise," Professor Lee said carefully. "The Kim family is one of the most powerful business dynasties in Korea, with connections that extend into politics, finance, and various other enterprises that we don't discuss in polite company. Jae-hyun's father, Kim Dae-young, controls a significant portion of Seoul's commercial real estate, and his grandfather, Kim Sun-woo, is the real power behind the family, a man who built an empire through methods that were not always legal." "Are you telling me that my student comes from a crime family?" Naledi asked, her voice coming out sharper than she'd intended. "I'm telling you that the Kim family is complicated," Professor Lee said, "and that Jae-hyun is not a typical student, and that you should be very careful about how you interact with him. There have been incidents in the past with female faculty members who got too close to members of the Kim family, and those situations did not end well for the women involved." "What kind of incidents?" Naledi demanded. "The kind we don't talk about," Professor Lee said, standing up. "I'm just giving you a friendly warning, colleague to colleague. Kim Jae-hyun may seem like a charming young man, but he comes from a world that operates by different rules than the ones we live by, and women who forget that tend to get hurt." After Professor Lee left, Naledi sat at her desk for a long time, staring at Jae-hyun's empty chair, trying to reconcile the earnest student who talked about Renaissance poetry with the idea of a Mafia Heir and failing spectacularly. He returned to class 2 weeks later, walking in 7 minutes late like that first day, but everything about him was different. There was a bruise on his left cheekbone, poorly covered with makeup, and his right hand was wrapped in a bandage, and when he looked at Naledi, there was something haunted in his eyes that made her want to stop the lecture and demand to know what had happened to him. She didn't, of course. She continued teaching about Lady Macbeth and the corruption of ambition, and tried not to notice the way Jae-hyun stared at her with something that looked like desperation, like she was a life raft and he was drowning. He stayed after class, waited until every other student had filed out, and then approached her desk with that careful, controlled walk that she now recognized as the movement of someone who had been trained to mask pain. "Professor Mabeso," he said, his voice rougher than usual, "I apologize for missing your classes. I hope it didn't impact my grade too severely." "Your grade is fine, Mr. Kim," she said, using his formal name deliberately, trying to re-establish the boundaries that had gotten so dangerously blurred. "You submitted all your work on time, and it was, as always, excellent. But I'm more concerned about you." Professor Lee mentioned there was a family emergency. "Family emergency," he repeated, and laughed, a sound with no humor in it at all. "Is that what they're calling it?" "Jae-hyun," she said, dropping the formality without thinking. "What happened to you?" He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him weighing something, deciding how much truth he could afford to tell her. "What happened," he said slowly, "is that I told my father that I didn't want to marry the woman his family has chosen for me, and he reminded me, in terms I couldn't misunderstand, that my wants are irrelevant to the family's needs." The words hit Naledi like a physical blow, each one carefully chosen to cause maximum damage. "You're engaged?" she asked, hating the way her voice cracked on the word. "Betrothed," he corrected. "Since I was 16. To the daughter of another powerful family. A marriage designed to consolidate territory and resources and create an alliance that will benefit both families for generations. Her name is Park Min-seo. She's beautiful and accomplished and perfectly suitable, and I don't love her, and I never will." "Jae-hyun," Naledi said, standing up and moving around the desk, forgetting every rule about appropriate boundaries. "You can't tell me these things. You're my student, this is inappropriate, and even if it wasn't, you're engaged to someone else, and I am not the kind of woman who gets involved in situations like this." "You keep saying I'm your student like it's a shield," he said, and there was anger in his voice now, mixed with the pain. "You keep reminding me about the rules, about the age difference, about all the reasons why this can't work, but you never say the one thing that would actually make me walk away." "What's that?" she whispered. "You never say that you don't want me," he said, stepping closer, close enough that she could see the way his pulse jumped in his throat, close enough that she could smell the faint copper scent of blood under his cologne. "You never say that you don't feel this thing between us, that you don't lie awake at night thinking about me the way I lie awake thinking about you, that you don't imagine what it would be like if we stopped pretending and just let ourselves fall." "It doesn't matter what I feel," Naledi said, but her voice shook with the effort of maintaining control. "You're engaged, you come from a world I don't understand, and even if none of that was true, I am still your professor, and you are still my student, and I will not throw away my career and my reputation for a fantasy that has no future." "It's not a fantasy," he said fiercely. "This is the most real thing in my life, Professor, this thing I feel when I'm with you, this sense that maybe I don't have to be what my family demands, maybe I can choose something different, someone different." "And what about Park Min-seo?" Naledi demanded. "What about the woman who's been promised your future?" "I don't love her," Jae-hyun said flatly. "I respect her, I would never hurt her intentionally, but I don't love her, and I never will, because every time I try to imagine my future, the only face I see is yours." "Stop," Naledi said, pressing her hands to her temples, trying to think through the chaos of her emotions. "Jae-hyun, you need to stop this. You need to go back to your fiancé, fulfill your obligations to your family, and forget about whatever you think this is between us." "I can't," he said simply. "I tried, Professor. I spent the last 2 weeks trying, and I can't. You're in my blood now, and I don't know how to cut you out." "Then you need to drop my class," she said, forcing herself to be cruel, to say the thing that might actually make him leave. "Because I cannot and will not engage with this, and if you stay, you're just going to torture both of us." She saw the words hit him, saw the way his entire body flinched like she'd struck him, and hated herself for causing him pain even as she knew it was necessary. "If that's what you really want," he said after a long moment, his voice carefully neutral, "then I'll drop the class. But I need to hear you say it, Professor. I need to hear you say that you want me gone, that you feel nothing when I'm near you, that this is all in my head." And Naledi opened her mouth to say exactly that, to lie convincingly enough that he would leave and she could go back to her safe, respectable life, and found that she couldn't do it. "I can't say that," she whispered. "God help me, I can't say that." The tension in the room shifted, became electric, and then Jae-hyun closed the distance between them and kissed her, his bruised mouth urgent and desperate against hers, his hands framing her face like she was something precious and breakable, and Naledi made a sound that was half sob, half surrender, and kissed him back. It lasted maybe 10 seconds before sanity returned, and she pushed him away, her hands shaking, her heart hammering, her lips burning from the contact. "This can't happen," she said, but they both knew the words were meaningless now. That line had been crossed and couldn't be uncrossed. "Jae-hyun, this absolutely cannot happen." "Too late," he said, his eyes dark and intense and fixed on her like she was his entire world. "It already has. That should have been the end of it, the moment that made them both pull back and salvage what they could of their student-teacher relationship, but instead it was the beginning of something reckless and consuming and utterly impossible to stop. They didn't meet in her office anymore, didn't take the risk of being alone together in the university, but somehow they found each other anyway, in coffee shops off campus where no one knew them, in art museums on Saturday afternoons where they could walk side by side and pretend to study the paintings while their hands brushed together in the space between them, In bookstores where he bought her first editions of novels she loved, and she scolded him for spending money on her, and they both knew the gifts had nothing to do with the books, and everything to do with the fact that he wanted to give her everything, and she didn't know how to tell him that she wanted to let him. They were careful, so careful, never touching where anyone could see, never arriving or leaving together, never doing anything that could be construed as more than a professor mentoring a promising student. But the tension between them grew with every meeting, every conversation that went too deep, every moment when their eyes met, and they both remembered the taste of that single kiss. And Naledi knew it was wrong, knew she was playing with fire, knew that every moment she spent with him was another moment closer to losing everything she had built, but she couldn't stop. Jaehyun had become an addiction, and she was powerless against it. "Tell me about South Africa," he said one Saturday in November, sitting across from her in a quiet cafe in Itaewon where the expatriate crowd gave them enough cover to meet without suspicion. "Tell me what it was like growing up there." So she told him about Soweto, about growing up black in a country that was just learning how to be free, about her grandmother who had raised her after her parents died, about the weight of carrying a history of oppression and resistance in her bones, about the complicated joy of watching her country transform while knowing that true change happened slowly, painfully, one generation at a time. And he listened like every word mattered, like her past was something precious, and when she was done, he said, "I understand what it's like to carry the weight of history that you didn't choose." "Tell me," she said, because they had crossed so many lines already, what was one more? So he told her about the Kim family, about his grandfather who had built an empire from nothing in the chaos after the Korean War, using methods that ranged from shrewd business to outright violence, about his father who had tried to legitimize the family's holdings while maintaining the power that came from their criminal roots, about the expectations that had been placed on him since birth to be the perfect heir, to marry the right woman, to produce the right sons, to never question the path that had been laid out for him before he could walk. "I've never had a choice," he said, staring into his coffee like it held answers. "Every decision in my life has already been made by men who are dead or dying, and I'm expected to simply execute their vision without question. But then I walked into your classroom, Professor, and for the first time in my life, I wanted something that wasn't part of the plan." "I'm not something you can want, Jaehyun," she said gently. "I'm a complication that will only make your life harder." "You're the only thing that makes my life bearable," he corrected, looking up at her with eyes full of something that looked painfully like love. "You're the only person who talks to me like I'm more than my family name, who cares about what I think and feel, who makes me believe that maybe I could be something other than what they've planned for me." "You're 21, she said, trying one more time to be the adult, to be reasonable. "You have your whole life ahead of you to figure out who you want to be. You don't need to tie yourself to a woman twice your age who can offer you nothing but complications." "I'm 21, not stupid," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand, and she let him, even though anyone could see, even though it was dangerous. "I know what I want, Professor, and I want you. I want to hear you talk about books and history and the ways that literature can change the world. I want to learn how you think, how you see patterns that other people miss. I want to make you laugh, because your laugh is the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. I want to take you to bed and spend hours learning every inch of you, learning what makes you gasp and what makes you moan and what makes you forget to be cautious. I want all of it, and I don't care about the obstacles." "Jaehyun," she breathed, her pulse racing, heat flooding through her at the explicit promise in his words. "I know you want it too," he said, his thumb stroking over her knuckles in a way that should not have been so arousing. "I can see it in your eyes every time you look at me. You want this as much as I do. You're just more afraid of the consequences." "With good reason," she said, but she didn't pull her hand away. "Jaehyun, even if we could somehow navigate the ethics violation, even if we could keep it secret until you graduate, you're still engaged to someone else, you're still the heir to a criminal empire, and I'm still a black woman in a country that already views me with suspicion. This can't work." "It can if we want it badly enough," he said with the stubborn certainty of someone who had never learned to accept defeat. "We can figure it out, Professor. We can find a way." And Naledi looked at him, at his beautiful, earnest face, at the bruise on his cheek that told her more than he realized about the violence that defined his world, and felt her resistance crumbling. "What about your fiancé?" she asked. "What about Park Minicio?" His face went cold at the mention of her name, a shuttered expression that suggested complicated guilt. "I'm going to break the engagement," he said. "I don't know how yet, I don't know what it will cost me, but I'm going to do it. I can't marry her when I'm in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and irrevocable. "You're not in love with me," Naledi said weakly. "You're infatuated, You're rebelling against your family. You're using me as a symbol of freedom. Professor Mabeso, he said, standing up and pulling her to her feet. I'm going to kiss you now, right here in this cafe where anyone can see. And if you still think it's just infatuation, then I'll walk away and never bother you again. He gave her 3 seconds to object, to pull away, to remember all the reasons why this was insane. She didn't move. And then he kissed her, slow and deep and devastating, kissed her like she was air and he was drowning. And Naledi forgot about ethics violations and age differences and the impossibility of their situation. Forgot everything except the feeling of his mouth on hers and his hands in her hair and the way her entire body came alive under his touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers and whispered, "Still think it's just infatuation?" "No," she admitted, and felt her carefully constructed life begin to crumble. "But that doesn't change the fact that this is impossible." "Nothing is impossible," he said. "Just difficult, and I've never been afraid of difficult." Which brought them to this moment, 3 weeks later, with bullets tearing through her classroom and Jae-hyun covering her body with his own, a gun pressed against her ribs that should not have been there, and the terrifying realization that the danger she had been warned about was not theoretical but brutally, violently real. The shooting stopped as abruptly as it started, and in the ringing silence that followed, Naledi became aware of several things simultaneously. First, Jae-hyun was shaking, his entire body vibrating with adrenaline, and something else, something that felt like rage. Second, there was a phone ringing somewhere, shrill and insistent. Third, she could hear screaming from other parts of the building, people running, chaos spreading like wildfire. And fourth, Jae-hyun was whispering something in Korean, a litany that sounded like a prayer or a curse, and she caught enough words to understand that he was promising violence to whoever had endangered her. "Jae-hyun," she said, trying to turn in his arms. "Let me up, we need to get out of here." "Not yet," he said, his voice hard. "They could still be outside." "Who?" she demanded. "Who the hell just shot up my classroom?" He didn't answer, just pulled out his phone with his free hand and made a call, speaking rapid Korean that Naledi couldn't follow, his tone commanding in a way she had never heard from him before. This was not her student speaking. This was someone else entirely, someone who gave orders and expected them to be obeyed, someone who belonged to the violent world Professor Lee had warned her about. When he hung up, he finally let her up, moving them both behind her desk, positioning himself between her and the door, the gun now visible in his hand. "Jesus Christ," Naledi breathed, staring at the weapon. "You brought a gun to my classroom." "I've been bringing a gun to your classroom since the first day," he said, checking the magazine with practiced efficiency. "I just got better at concealing it after the first few weeks." "Why?" she demanded, her hands shaking as the adrenaline began to ebb, leaving behind shock and terror. "Why would you need to bring a gun to a literature seminar?" "Because my family has enemies," he said flatly. "And those enemies know that the best way to hurt the Kim family is to target the heir, and I wasn't going to risk them using you to get to me." "Using me?" she repeated. "Jae-hyun, what the hell are you talking about?" He looked at her, and there was guilt and fear and something almost like despair in his eyes. "They know about us, Professor," he said quietly. "My family's enemies know that you matter to me, which means you're a target now, which means I need to get you somewhere safe before they try again." Naledi felt the room tilt, felt the full weight of what she had done crash over her like a wave. "This is because of me," she whispered. "Someone just shot up my classroom because you and I have been meeting in cafes." "This is because of my family," he corrected fiercely. "This is because we're at war with the Park family, because Park Minasio's father is trying to force my hand by eliminating any competition for my attention, because the engagement is more important to him than it is to me, and he's willing to kill to ensure it happens." "Your fiancé's father just tried to kill me?" Naledi asked, hysteria bubbling up in her throat. "Not kill," Jae-hyun said. "Scare. If he wanted you dead, you would be." This was a warning, a message to me that if I don't fall in line, next time they won't miss. "Next time," she repeated numbly. "There's going to be a next time." "Not if I can help it," he said, and there was something terrifying in his voice, something that spoke of violence and certainty. "Professor, I need you to trust me right now. I need you to let me take you somewhere safe, somewhere my people can protect you until we resolve this." "Your people," she said, laughing without humor. "You mean your criminal organization. You mean the Mafia family I've been told to stay away from." "Yes," he said simply. "I mean exactly that." Naledi looked at him, at the beautiful student she had fallen for despite every instinct telling her it was a mistake, and saw clearly for the first time what he really was. Not a charming young man rebelling against his family, but a prince of a criminal empire who had dragged her into a war she didn't understand. I can't do this, she said, backing away from him. Jae-hyun, I need to call the police. I need to report this shooting. I need to. The police won't help you, he interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. Half of them are on my family's payroll, and the other half are on the Park family's payroll. You call them, and you're just painting a bigger target on your back. Then what am I supposed to do? She demanded, feeling tears of frustration and fear prick at her eyes. Just let you take me to some secret location and become a prisoner of your family? You're not a prisoner, he said, moving toward her slowly, like she was a frightened animal. You're someone I care about, someone I need to protect, and I'm asking you to trust me. How can I trust you? She asked, her voice breaking. You've been lying to me this whole time, pretending to be a normal student when you're actually, what? A mafia enforcer? An assassin? An heir, he said quietly. Just an heir trying to survive long enough to change things. Before Naledi could respond, his phone buzzed again, and his face went hard as he read the message. We need to go now, he said, grabbing her arm with his free hand, the gun still held ready in the other. My men are downstairs with a car, and we have maybe 3 minutes before Park's people regroup. I'm not going anywhere with you, she said, trying to pull away, but his grip was gentle and implacable. Professor Mabeso, he said, and there was something desperate in his voice now. Naledi, please, I am begging you to trust me. I know I've lied to you about who I am. I know this is terrifying, but if you don't come with me right now, you will die, and I cannot live with that. Please. It was the please that broke her, the raw desperation in his voice that told her whatever else he had lied about, his feelings for her were terrifyingly real. Fine, she said. But after this is over, you and I are done. You understand. Whatever this was between us, it ends today. She saw the pain flash across his face, saw him absorb the words like a blow, but he just nodded and said, If that's what you need to believe to get through this, then fine. But we need to move now. He led her to the door, checked the hallway, and then they were running, his hand still gripping her arm, navigating through corridors filled with panicked students and faculty, heading for a back stairwell that would take them away from the main campus area. They burst out into the cold November air, and a black SUV screeched to a halt in front of them, the back door opening before it even stopped moving. Jae-hyun practically threw her into the back seat and climbed in after her, barking orders in Korean to the driver before they were moving again, tires squealing as they pulled away from the university. Naledi sat frozen in the leather seat, her mind struggling to process the last 10 minutes, while Jae-hyun spoke rapid Korean into his phone, his voice hard and commanding, and she realized with a sinking feeling that this was the real Kim Jae-hyun, not the charming student who had sat in her office talking about Shakespeare, but the heir to a criminal empire who was perfectly comfortable ordering people around in the aftermath of violence. They took her to a house in Gangnam, a massive modern structure hidden behind high walls and security cameras, and Naledi walked through doors that whispered money and power in every carefully chosen detail, following Jae-hyun through rooms that looked like they belonged in an architectural magazine, until they reached a bedroom on the 3rd floor that he assured her was secure. You'll be safe here, he said, gesturing around at the luxurious space. My men are stationed throughout the building. Park's people won't dare attack my family's territory directly, and I'll have someone bring you clothes and anything else you need. For how long? She asked, standing in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped around herself. How long am I supposed to hide here? Until I resolve this, he said. A few days, maybe a week. I have classes to teach, she said, her voice rising. I have responsibilities. I have a life, Jae-hyun. I can't just disappear for a week. Your life won't matter if you're dead, he said bluntly. Professor, I know this is difficult. I know you're scared and angry, but please, just give me a few days to fix this. How? She demanded. How are you going to fix the fact that your fiancé's father wants me dead? By making him understand that you're under my protection, he said, and there was something dark in his eyes that made her shiver. By making it clear that anyone who touches you will answer to me personally. And if that doesn't work, then I'll handle it another way, he said, and she heard the unspoken threat in his voice, the promise of violence. Jesus Christ, she whispered, sinking down onto the edge of the bed. This is insane. This entire situation is insane. Jae-hyun crouched down in front of her, taking her shaking hands in his, and when she looked into his eyes, she saw the student she had fallen for underneath the Mafia Heir, saw the vulnerability that he usually kept hidden. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I'm so sorry that I dragged you into this, that my feelings for you put you in danger. If I could take it back, if I could go back to that first day and walk past your classroom without looking in, I would, because you deserve better than this, better than me. Then why don't you? She asked, tears finally spilling over. Why don't you just let me go, break whatever hold you think we have on each other, and let me go back to my normal life. Because I can't, he said simply. Because even knowing that loving you puts you in danger, even knowing that the smart thing would be to walk away, I can't. You're in my blood, Professor, and I would rather die than lose you. You're 21, she said again, but the words had lost their power to convince either of them. You don't know what love is. I know that when I'm with you, I feel like I can finally breathe, he said. I know that you're the first person in my life who has ever looked at me and seen me, not my family name or my inheritance or my use to them. I know that every moment I spend away from you feels like drowning. If that's not love, Professor, then I don't know what is. Naledi closed her eyes, feeling the last of her resistance crumble, and whispered, What am I supposed to do with you, Jaehyun? Love me back, he said. That's all I'm asking. Just love me back. And despite everything, despite the insanity of the situation and the danger and the impossibility of any future together, she found herself pulling him up to sit beside her on the bed, found herself leaning into him when he wrapped his arms around her, found herself admitting the truth she had been fighting for months. I already do, she whispered against his shoulder. God help me, I already do. She felt him shudder against her, felt his arms tighten like he was trying to absorb her into his body, and then he was turning her face up to his and kissing her, and this kiss was different from the others, deeper and more desperate, like he was trying to claim her in a way that went beyond the physical. Naledi kissed him back with all the pent-up longing and fear and need that had been building for months. Let herself forget about ethics violations and age differences and criminal empires. Let herself just feel for once without overthinking, and when his hands slid under her shirt, she didn't stop him. Naledi, he breathed against her mouth, his accent making her name sound like a prayer. Tell me to stop if you don't want this. I want this, she said, surprising herself with her certainty. I want you, Jaehyun, consequences be damned. And then they were moving together, peeling away layers of clothing and inhibitions, and Naledi discovered that her young lover was not inexperienced, that he knew exactly how to touch her, where to kiss her, how to make her gasp and arch and beg. And when he finally pushed inside her, she felt something fundamental shift in her chest, felt herself become irrevocably bound to this beautiful, dangerous boy who loved her with an intensity that should have terrified her. They made love 3 times that night, learning each other's bodies with a hunger that suggested they both knew their time together was limited. And in the spaces between, Jaehyun told her things he had never told anyone else, about the weight of being the Kim heir, about the violence he had witnessed and been forced to participate in, about the future that had been mapped out for him before he was born, and how meeting her had made him question everything. I don't want to be what they made me, he whispered in the darkness, his head on her chest, her fingers running through his hair. I don't want to spend my life managing criminal enterprises and making alliances through marriage and perpetuating the cycle of violence that my grandfather started. I want to be someone different, someone worthy of you. You're already worthy, she said softly. Jaehyun, whatever choices your family made, whatever blood is on their hands, you are not defined by that. You can choose differently. Not if I stay, he said. Not if I accept my inheritance. Then don't accept it, she said, even though she knew it wasn't that simple. Walk away, be a normal student, build a different life. It's not that easy, he said. Walking away from my family means giving up everything, my trust fund, my connections, my protection. It means becoming a target for every enemy the Kims have made over 3 generations. It means putting everyone I care about in danger. Including me, she said. Especially you, he agreed. If I walk away, Park will see it as an opportunity to hurt me through you. If I stay, I have the resources to protect you. Either way, you're caught in this because of me. Then we'll figure it out together, she said, hearing herself say it and not quite believing that she meant it, but knowing that she did. Jaehyun, I'm already in this. Hiding me in your house for a week isn't going to change that. So we need to find a way to actually end this threat, not just postpone it. He lifted his head to look at her, and in the dim light from the window, she could see hope and fear warring in his expression. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe we need to fight back, she said. Maybe we need to find a way to break your engagement to Park Min-seo, to remove the motivation for her father to see me as a threat. You don't understand what you're asking, he said. Breaking a betrothal contract in our world isn't like breaking up with a girlfriend. It's a political statement, an insult to the Park family that could trigger an all-out war between our families. Then we make them want to break it, Naledi said, her mind working through the problem like it was one of her Renaissance political dramas. We make Park Min-seo want out of the marriage as much as you do. How? I don't know yet, she admitted. But I'm a scholar of human behavior and political maneuvering, and I'm betting that your fiancé is no more excited about this arranged marriage than you are. So maybe we need to talk to her, find out what she wants, and see if there's a way to give everyone what they need without bloodshed. Jae-hyun stared at her for a long moment, and then he started laughing, a genuine sound of surprise and delight. What? She asked, confused. You, he said, pulling her down for a kiss. You're brilliant, and I'm an idiot for not thinking of this myself. Min Seo hates the engagement as much as I do. She's told me so on the few occasions we've been forced to interact. She's in love with someone else, someone her family won't approve of, and she's been trying to figure out how to escape without triggering a war. Then there's your answer, Naledi said. We help each other escape. We find a way to break the engagement that gives both families what they really want, which is the alliance and the business benefits, without the marriage. It might work, he said slowly. It's dangerous, and there are a dozen ways it could go wrong, but it might actually work. Then let's do it, she said. Let's be smart about this instead of just hiding and hoping the problem goes away. He kissed her again, slower this time, reverent, and whispered, I love you, Professor Mabeso. I love you so much it terrifies me. I love you too, she said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. Which is why we're going to survive this. The next morning, Naledi woke up to find Jae-hyun gone, a note on the pillow beside her that said he had meetings with his father and would be back by evening, and to please not leave the house under any circumstances. She spent the day exploring her gilded cage, discovering that the Kim family home was less a house than a compound, with multiple wings and levels and security measures that suggested paranoia was a family trait. She found a library on the second floor that rivaled most university collections, and lost herself in books until one of Jae-hyun's men, an intimidating older man who introduced himself as Mr. Choi, brought her lunch and informed her that someone was here to see her. Who? She asked, her heart racing with fear that it was an enemy. Park Min Seo, Mr. Choi said, and Naledi's stomach dropped. Jae-hyun's fiancé? The same, Mr. Choi confirmed. She's asked to speak with you. Jae-hyun left instructions that you were not to be disturbed, but Mississippi Park was very insistent, and she came alone, without her father's knowledge. Naledi stood up, smoothing down the clothes that Jae-hyun had left for her, designer pieces that fit perfectly and probably cost more than her monthly salary, and said, show her in. Park Min Seo turned out to be nothing like Naledi had imagined. She was beautiful, yes, with the kind of delicate features that Korean beauty standards worshipped, but there was intelligence in her eyes and steel in her spine that suggested she was far more than just a decorative alliance bride. She walked into the library like she owned it, dismissed Mr. Choi with a curt gesture, and then turned to study Naledi with frank curiosity. So you're the professor, Min Seo said in perfect English, her accent suggesting years of international education. The woman who has my fiancé so tied in knots that he's willing to risk a family war to keep you. I didn't ask for any of this, Naledi said, raising her chin. I never wanted to come between you and Jae-hyun. Good, Min Seo said, surprising her. Because I don't want him. I never have. This betrothal is a political arrangement that benefits our fathers, not us, and I've been trying to find a way out of it since I was 16 years old. Naledi blinked, thrown by the woman's directness. Then why are you here? Because my father tried to have you killed yesterday, Min Seo said bluntly, sitting down in one of the library's leather chairs and gesturing for Naledi to do the same. And I can't let that stand. I may not love Jae-hyun, but I respect him, and I respect anyone who makes him happy enough to defy his family. So I'm here to help. Help how? By giving you information, Min Seo said. My father is planning something bigger than a simple assassination attempt. He's been meeting with the other families, forming alliances, preparing for what he sees as an inevitable conflict with the Kims. He thinks Jae-hyun is weak, that his feelings for you make him vulnerable, and he's planning to use that vulnerability to destroy the Kim family's power base. Why are you telling me this? Naledi asked. If your father succeeds, your family benefits. My family benefits, Min Seo agreed, but I don't. Because the price of my father's ambition is my freedom. If he consolidates enough power, he'll marry me off to whoever offers the best political advantage, and I'll lose my chance to be with the person I actually love. Who is? Naledi asked gently. Her name is Lee Soo-jin, Min Seo said, and there was softness in her voice that transformed her face. She's the daughter of one of my father's associates, and we've been in love since we were teenagers, and if my father knew, he would disown me or worse. I'm sorry, Naledi said, meaning it. Don't be sorry, Min Seo said. Help me. You and Jae-hyun want out of this engagement. I want out of this engagement, and we both have secrets that could destroy us if they're revealed. So let's work together to find a solution that frees all of us. Jae-hyun and I had the same idea, Naledi said. We thought if we could break the engagement in a way that preserved the business alliance between your families, it might work. It could, Minesio said thoughtfully, if we're smart about it. The real value of our betrothal isn't the marriage itself, it's the combining of resources and territories. If we can find another way to achieve that, a business merger or joint venture that gives both families what they want, then the marriage becomes unnecessary. Can you sell that to your father? Naledi asked. Maybe, Minesio said. If I can convince him that Jae-hyun is genuinely unstable, that marrying him would be more liability than asset, he might be willing to consider alternatives. But I'll need proof of Jae-hyun's instability, something dramatic enough to make my father believe the Kim heir is unfit for alliance. Like falling in love with a woman twice his age, Naledi said dryly. Exactly, Minesio said with a smile that suggested she was warming to the scheme. A scandal big enough to make both families want to distance themselves from the marriage, but controlled enough that it doesn't trigger open warfare. They spent the next hour plotting, two women from completely different worlds finding common ground in their shared desire for freedom, and by the time Jae-hyun returned that evening, they had the skeleton of a plan. Jae-hyun walked into the library to find his professor and his fiancée sitting together like old friends, and the expression on his face was almost comical in its confusion. Minesio, he said carefully. What are you doing here? Conspiring with your girlfriend, Minesio said cheerfully. Don't worry, I'm on your side. In fact, I'm about to make both our lives much easier. Over dinner that night, with Mr. Choi standing guard and Minesio's bodyguard waiting outside, they refined their plan, turning it from a rough idea into something that might actually work. The key, they decided, was to create a scandal so public and so dramatic that both families would have no choice but to break the engagement to save face. They would stage a confrontation at an upcoming charity gala, an event that both the Kim and Park families would attend along with most of Seoul's elite, and they would make sure that everyone saw Jae-hyun choose Naledi over Minesio in a way that could not be ignored or explained away. It needs to be shocking, Minesio said, her eyes bright with the thrill of rebellion. Not just you showing up with the professor on your arm, but something that makes it clear you're willing to throw away everything for her. A proposal, Naledi said quietly, the idea of forming even as she spoke it. In front of everyone, in front of both families, you propose to me. You make it clear that you're choosing love over duty, that you're willing to walk away from your inheritance if that's what it takes to be with me. That could trigger the war we're trying to avoid, Jae-hyun said, but she could see the idea taking hold in his mind. Not if I publicly refuse you, Naledi said. Not if I make a scene about the age difference, about the impossibility of our relationship, about how you're throwing your life away for an older woman who can't give you the future you deserve. I humiliate you in front of everyone, and you look like a foolish young man who got his heart broken, not a threat to family alliances. And I play the sympathetic jilted fiancé, Minesio said, catching on. I'm gracious and forgiving. I show concern for Jae-hyun's mental state, and I suggest to my father that perhaps this engagement was always doomed because the Kim heir is clearly unstable. Then, in private, I propose the business merger as an alternative to the marriage, something that achieves the same goals without tying our families to someone who has proven himself unreliable. And my father, Jae-hyun said slowly, will be so humiliated by my public rejection that he'll be eager to dissolve the engagement and punish me by cutting me off financially, which is exactly what I want anyway. I can walk away from the family, take a reduced inheritance, and build a different life. With me, Naledi said, looking at him. If this works, you'll be giving up everything for me. Your family, your money, your position. Are you sure that's what you want? I've never been more sure of anything, he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. Professor, you are worth more to me than all of my family's blood money and criminal empire. If I have to choose between that world and you, I choose you every time. Minesio made a sound that might have been a swallowed laugh. You two are disgustingly in love. It's actually kind of sweet. What about Sujin? Naledi asked. How does this help you be with her? Once the engagement is broken and I've helped broker the business merger, I'll have leverage with my father, Minesio explained. I'll have proven my value to the family as a strategist and negotiator, not just a pawn to be married off. And then I'll tell him about Sujin, and I'll make it clear that I'm not asking for permission, I'm informing him of my choice. He might disown me too, but at least I'll be free. We're all walking away from our families, Jae-hyun said, looking around the table. We're all choosing love over duty. Then let's make it count, Naledi said. Let's make this scandal so spectacular that they'll be talking about it for years. They had 2 weeks to prepare before the gala, 2 weeks during which Naledi stayed hidden in the Kim compound while Jaehyun and Min Seo laid the groundwork for their public confrontation, planting rumors and manipulating perceptions to ensure maximum impact. Naledi used the time to really think, about what she was about to do, about the fact that she was helping a 21-year-old boy blow up his life for her, about the ethics violations and age difference, and all the reasons this was a terrible idea. But every night, Jaehyun came to her room, and they made love like they were trying to memorize each other. And every morning, she woke up more certain that whatever the cost, whatever the consequences, she wanted this, wanted him, wanted the impossible future they were fighting for. "Are you scared?" he asked her one night, 5 days before the gala, his head on her chest, her fingers tracing patterns on his back. "Terrified," she admitted. "Jaehyun, if this doesn't work, if something goes wrong, people could die. Your father could retaliate, Min Seo's father could escalate, and it would be our fault." "Min Seo and I have contingency plans," he assured her. "We've been working with some of the younger generation in both families, people who are tired of the violence and ready for change. If things go south, we have allies who will help us disappear, who will make sure neither family can find us." "Disappear where?" "Wherever you want," he said. "Back to South Africa, if that's where you'd feel safe. To America, to Europe, anywhere in the world where we can start over." "You would do that?" she asked. "Leave Korea, leave everything you know, just to be with me?" "Naledi," he said, rising up on his elbows to look down at her, his eyes fierce and certain. "I would walk through fire to be with you. Leaving Korea is nothing compared to losing you." She pulled him down for a kiss that turned heated, turned desperate, and they didn't talk again for a long time. The night of the gala arrived with brutal speed, and Naledi found herself being dressed by a team of stylists that Min Seo had sent over, being transformed into someone who could walk into a room full of Korean elite and not look completely out of place. The dress they chose was stunning, a deep emerald green that complemented her dark skin beautifully, cut to emphasize her curves without being inappropriate, elegant and age-appropriate, and absolutely perfect for the role she was about to play. "You look beautiful," Jaehyun said when he came to collect her, wearing a tuxedo that made him look even more like a movie star than usual. "Professor, you're going to stop hearts tonight." "That's not the goal," she said, her stomach churning with nerves. "The goal is to make a scene and get out alive." "We'll do both," he promised, offering her his arm. "Trust me." The gala was being held at one of Seoul's most prestigious hotels, a glittering affair full of people who represented the intersection of legitimate business and criminal enterprise, and as Naledi walked in on Jaehyun's arm, she felt every eye in the room turn to stare at them. She had expected whispers, had expected shock, but the reality was even more intense than she'd imagined. People literally stopped mid-conversation to stare at the spectacle of Kim Jae-hyun, heir to one of Seoul's most powerful families, arriving at a formal event with a black woman twice his age on his arm. "Ignore them," Jae-hyun murmured, guiding her through the crowd toward where his father and grandfather stood near the bar, their faces already dark with anger. "Just stay close to me." They made it about halfway across the room before Park Min-seo's father, Park Dong-wook, intercepted them, his face a mask of cold fury. "Kim Jae-hyun," he said in Korean, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "What is the meaning of this? Why have you brought this woman to an event meant for families?" "Because she is family," Jae-hyun said in English, making sure everyone in the room could understand, including Naledi. "Because she is the woman I love, and I wanted everyone to see us together." The room erupted in shocked murmurs, and Naledi saw Jae-hyun's father push through the crowd, his face purple with rage. "You dare," Kim Dae-young hissed, also in English. "You dare to humiliate our family like this, to bring your whore to a formal event and parade her in front of our allies?" "She is not my whore," Jae-hyun said, his voice going cold and dangerous. "She is Professor Naledi Mabeso, and she is the woman I intend to marry." The statement hung in the air like a bomb, and then chaos erupted. Park Dong-wook lunged forward, and only the quick intervention of security kept him from physically attacking Jae-hyun. Kim Dae-young grabbed his son's arm, shouting in Korean about duty and honor and betrayal. Min Seo appeared at Naledi's elbow, playing her role perfectly, her face a mask of hurt and confusion. And in the center of it all, Jae-hyun pulled away from his father, dropped to one knee in the middle of the ballroom, and pulled out a ring that Naledi had not known he was carrying. "Professor Mabeso," he said, his voice ringing clear across the suddenly silent room. "Naledi, I know this is not how you imagine this moment. I know the circumstances are insane, and we're surrounded by people who want to destroy us. But I need you to know that I love you. I have loved you since the first day I walked into your classroom, and I want to spend the rest of my life loving you. Will you marry me?" This was the moment, the pivot point on which their entire plan rested, and Naledi looked down at this beautiful, foolish boy who was offering her everything, and felt her heart break even as she prepared to do what they had planned. "No," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, and she saw genuine pain flash across Jae-hyun's face, knew that even though this was scripted, the rejection still hurt. "Jae-hyun, I can't marry you. I'm 42 years old, you're 21, I'm your professor for God's sake. This is insane, you're throwing away your entire future for a fantasy that can never work, and I won't let you do it." "It's not a fantasy," he said, still on his knee, playing his part perfectly even though she could see the strain in his eyes. "This is the most real thing in my life, Professor, and I don't care about the age difference. I don't care about my family or their expectations. I only care about you." "You should care," she said, forcing steel into her voice, channeling every ounce of professorial authority she possessed. "You should care about the fact that I cannot give you children, that I come with a lifetime of baggage and complications, that in 10 years I'll be in my 50s while you're still in your prime. You should care about the fact that this infatuation you feel will fade, and you'll wake up one day and realize you destroyed your life for someone who was never worth it." She saw him flinch, saw the way her words landed like blows, and hated herself for it even though she knew it was necessary. "You are worth it," he said, but his voice was smaller now, uncertain, and she could see the doubts creeping in, the realization that maybe she meant what she was saying. "I'm not," she said firmly, and then she did the cruelest thing of all. She took off the necklace he had given her the week before, a delicate chain with a small diamond pendant, and placed it in his outstretched hand alongside the ring. "I'm sorry, Jae-hyun. I'm sorry that I let this go so far, that I didn't stop it when I should have. But I'm stopping it now, before you ruin your life for something that was never going to work." And then, before she could lose her nerve, before she could see the full impact of her words on his face, she turned and walked away, pushing through the crowd of stunned onlookers, heading for the exit with her head held high and her heart shattering into pieces. Behind her, she heard Minesio's voice, perfectly pitched for sympathetic concern, saying something about getting Jae-hyun medical attention, about how he had clearly been unstable for months, about how perhaps the engagement should be reconsidered given his mental state. She heard Park Dong-wook agreeing, his voice carrying across the ballroom, saying that no daughter of his would be married to someone so weak, so easily manipulated by an older woman's charms. She heard Kim Dae-young disowning his son, declaring in front of everyone that Jae-hyun was no longer welcome in the Kim family, that he had proven himself unworthy of his inheritance. And she kept walking, even though every step felt like tearing herself apart, even though she wanted nothing more than to turn around and run back to Jae-hyun and tell him she hadn't meant it, that she loved him, that she would marry him, and damn the consequences. She made it to the hotel lobby before the tears started, and then a hand grabbed her arm, and she was being pulled into a waiting car, and Min Seo was there, and Mr. Choi was driving, and they were racing away from the hotel before anyone could follow. "You did perfect," Min Seo said, squeezing her hand. "Nality, that was brutal and perfect, and it worked exactly like we planned." "Where's Jae-hyun?" Nality asked, her voice thick with tears. "Is he okay?" "He's devastated," Min Seo said honestly, "but he's also playing his part. Right now he's letting his father berate him in front of everyone, cementing the image of the disgraced heir who threw everything away for a woman who didn't want him. It's perfect." "It doesn't feel perfect," Nality said, wiping at her tears. "Min Seo, I destroyed him in there." "You freed him," Min Seo corrected. "You gave him exactly what he needed to walk away from his family with his head held high. Yes, it hurt, but it was necessary, and in 3 days, when the dust settles and the engagement is formally dissolved, you'll have your life together. 3 days of pain for a lifetime of freedom." Nality nodded, trying to believe it, but the image of Jae-hyun's face when she'd rejected him kept playing in her mind like a nightmare on repeat. They took her to a safe house in Itaewon, a modest apartment that belonged to one of Min Seo's trusted allies, and told her to wait there while they executed the next phase of the plan. Min Seo returned to the gala to play her role as the gracious almost bride who was now free to broker a better deal, while Jae-hyun was reportedly being taken to a private hospital by his family, ostensibly for psychiatric evaluation, but actually to keep him away from the media frenzy that was already building. Nality spent 3 days in that apartment, watching Korean news channels dissect the scandal, seeing her own face plastered across television screens with captions she couldn't read but could guess at, listening to Min Seo's updates about how both families were scrambling to control the narrative and save face. On the 3rd day, Min Seo arrived with news. "It's done," she said, sinking into the chair across from Nality with the exhaustion of someone who had been negotiating for 72 hours straight. "The engagement is formally dissolved, Both families have agreed to a business merger that accomplishes everything the marriage would have, and Jae-hyun has been officially disowned and cut off from the Kim family fortune. Is he okay? Naledi asked immediately. He's free, Minesio said with a tired smile. He's also practically broke, since his trust fund was contingent on family loyalty, but he's free. And he's asking for you. He's at another safe house about 10 minutes from here, and he's been asking for you every hour since the gala ended. Naledi was already standing, already grabbing her coat. Take me to him. The safe house was smaller than the one she'd been staying in, a studio apartment in a building that had seen better days, and when Minesio opened the door, Naledi saw Jae-hyun sitting on the edge of a narrow bed, his head in his hands, looking more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. I'll give you two some privacy, Minesio said, backing out and closing the door softly. Jae-hyun, Naledi said, and he looked up, and the relief and pain and love in his eyes made her heart clench. He stood up, took 2 steps toward her, and then stopped, like he was afraid she would reject him again. Did you mean it? He asked, his voice rough. At the gala, when you said I was throwing my life away for someone who wasn't worth it, did you mean it? No, she said, closing the distance between them, framing his face with her hands. God, no, Jae-hyun, I didn't mean a word of it. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, saying those things to you, watching you break, and I'm so sorry. He pulled her against him so hard it hurt, burying his face in her neck, and she felt his whole body shaking. I knew it was an act, he said against her skin. I knew we had planned it, but hearing you say those things, feeling you walk away, it killed me, Professor. It actually killed me. I'm here now, she said, running her hands through his hair, holding him as tight as he was holding her. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere, and we did it, Jae-hyun. We're free. He pulled back to look at her, and there were tears on his face, and she had never loved him more than she did in that moment. I have nothing to offer you now, he said. No money, no family, no prospects beyond maybe finishing my degree if the university doesn't expel me for the scandal. I'm just a disgraced ex-heir with a criminal family history and no job skills beyond looking pretty and knowing how to use a gun. Are you sure you want this? Are you sure you want me? I have never been more sure of anything, she said, and kissed him, tasting salt and relief and the promise of a future they had fought for. But freedom, it turned out, was more complicated than they had anticipated. The scandal had made them both famous in Seoul, the kind of notorious celebrity that came with photographers following them and strangers recognizing them on the street and constant speculation about their relationship. The university had not expelled Naledi, but they had made it clear that her contract would not be renewed at the end of the academic year, that her relationship with a student, even a former student since Jae-hyun had officially withdrawn, had damaged her credibility beyond repair. Jae-hyun had moved in with her, into her modest apartment in Mapo, and they were trying to build something normal, something sustainable, but the weight of what they had given up hung over them like a shadow. I should get a job, Jae-hyun said one evening 2 months after the gala, sitting at her kitchen table while she graded papers. I can't just live off your salary while you support both of us. You're finishing your degree, she said. That's your job right now. I'm taking online classes because I can't show my face on campus without causing a scene, he said, frustration evident in his voice. That's not a real education, Professor. That's just killing time until we figure out what comes next. What do you want to come next? She asked, putting down her pen to give him her full attention. I don't know, he admitted. I've never had to think about it before. My entire life was planned out, every step mapped from birth to death, and now that I'm off that path, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. You figure it out, she said gently. That's what life is, Jae-hyun. You try things, you fail at some of them, you succeed at others, and eventually you find something that makes you want to get up in the morning. You're 21 years old. You have time to figure it out. I just don't want to be a burden to you, he said quietly. You gave up so much for me, your reputation, your career, your standing in the academic community. I need to be worth that sacrifice. You already are, she said, standing up and moving to wrap her arms around him from behind. Jae-hyun, I didn't give up anything I wasn't ready to lose. Yes, the university is letting me go, but I was getting tired of academic politics anyway. Yes, we're living on a tight budget, but I've lived on less. And yes, people stare at us when we go out, but I don't care what strangers think. All I care about is that we're together, and we're free, and we get to build whatever life we want. He turned in her arms, pulled her into his lap, and kissed her with a desperation that suggested he was still afraid this was temporary, that someone would take it away. I love you, he said against her mouth. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I love you too, she said. And we're going to be okay. She believed it when she said it. She believed that the worst was behind them, that they had weathered the storm and come out the other side intact. She was wrong. The warning came from an unexpected source. Min-seo showed up at their apartment 3 months after the gala, looking exhausted and frightened in a way that immediately put Naledi on alert. "We have a problem," Min-seo said without preamble, barely waiting for Jaehyun to close the door behind her. "A big one. What kind of problem?" Jaehyun asked, his voice going cold and controlled in a way that reminded Naledi he had been trained for violence. "Your grandfather," Min-seo said. "Kim Sunwoo. He's not accepting the dissolution of the engagement, and he's not accepting your leaving the family. He's been making moves, consolidating power, calling in favors, and from what my sources tell me, he's planning something." "Planning what?" Naledi asked, fear crawling up her spine. "I don't know exactly," Min-seo admitted. "But he's been asking questions about you, Professor Mafia, about your daughter in Cape Town, about your friends in South Africa, about everyone you care about. He's building a file, and in our world, that means he's preparing leverage. He's going to threaten my daughter," Naledi said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "He's going to use Zinel to force me away from Jaehyun." "Probably," Min-seo confirmed. "Or worse, he might use her to force Jaehyun back into the family. Either way, she's in danger, and you need to get her somewhere safe before he makes his move." Jaehyun was already on his phone, speaking rapid Korean to someone, his face a mask of controlled fury. "I'm calling in every favor I have left," he said after he hung up. "We're getting your daughter out of South Africa tonight, bringing her somewhere my grandfather can't reach her." "She's in the middle of her medical residency," Naledi protested. "Jaehyun, she can't just drop everything and run. She can if the alternative is being kidnapped by my grandfather's people," he said flatly. "Professor, you need to call her right now and tell her to pack a bag and get to the airport. We have a plane waiting, and we need her in the air before Sunwoo's people can get to her." Naledi's hands shook as she dialed her daughter's number, praying Zinel would answer, praying this wasn't already too late. "Mom." Zinel's voice came through, bright and unsuspecting. "Is everything okay? I saw the news about you and that student, and I've been worried." "Zinel, baby, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Naledi interrupted, forcing calm into her voice. "I need you to trust me and do exactly what I say without asking questions. Can you do that?" "Mom, you're scaring me." "I know, and I'm sorry, but there are people who want to hurt you to get to me, and I need you to get somewhere safe right now. Pack a bag with essentials, nothing more, and go to the airport. There's a private plane waiting for you, flight number." She looked at Jaehyun, who held up his phone with the details. "KL 7734. The pilot's name is Captain Han, and he's going to bring you to Seoul. I'll explain everything when you get here, but right now I just need you to trust me and move." There was a long pause, and then Zinel said, "Okay, Mom. I'm trusting you. I'll be on that plane in 2 hours." "I love you," Naledi said, tears streaming down her face. "I love you so much, baby." "I love you too, Mom," Zinel said and hung up. The next 12 hours were the longest of Naledi's life, waiting for confirmation that Zinel had made it onto the plane, that she was in the air, that she was safe. Jaehyun stayed glued to his phone, coordinating with the few allies he still had in Seoul's underworld, while Min-seo worked her own contacts to find out more about Kim Sunwoo's plans. When Zinel's plane finally landed at Incheon Airport, Naledi was there to meet her, pulling her daughter into a crushing hug and trying not to break down completely. Zinel Mafia was 23 years old, brilliant and beautiful, and nothing like Naledi had been at that age, and seeing her standing in a Seoul airport, confused and frightened and trusting her mother despite not understanding what was happening, broke something in Naledi's chest. "Mom," Zinel said, pulling back to look at her. "What the hell is going on? Why did I just have to flee South Africa like I'm in a spy movie?" "I'll explain everything," Naledi promised. "But first I need to get you somewhere safe." They took Zinel to the safe house in Itaewon, and over the next several hours, Naledi explained everything. The relationship with Jaehyun, the mafia connections, the scandal, the threats from his grandfather, and the danger that Zinel was now in simply by being related to her. To her credit, Zinel listened to the whole story without interrupting, and when Naledi was done, she said, "So let me get this straight. You fell in love with a student half your age who happens to be a Mafia Heir. You helped him blow up his entire life to be with you. And now his crime boss grandfather is threatening me to force you apart. Is that about right?" "Yes," Naledi said miserably. "Zinel, I am so sorry. I never meant for any of this to touch you. I never meant to put you in danger." "Mom," Zinel said, taking her hands, "I'm not angry. I'm terrified, yes, and this is absolutely insane, but I'm not angry. You spent your entire life being responsible, being respectable, doing everything right. If you finally found someone who makes you happy, even if the circumstances are completely bats-hit crazy, then I support you. You do? Nality asked, surprised. Of course I do, Zinel said. Though I'm definitely going to need to meet this boy who's worth all this drama. Which is how, an hour later, Zinel met Jaehyun, and Nality watched nervously as her daughter studied the young man who had turned their lives upside down. So you're the one, Zinel said, looking him up and down with clinical assessment. You're the one who made my mother risk everything. Yes, Jaehyun said simply, not flinching from her scrutiny. And I know I have no right to ask for your approval, but I love your mother more than I've ever loved anything in my life, and I will spend the rest of my existence trying to be worthy of her. Zinel stared at him for a long moment, and then she smiled. You know what? I believe you. You're way too young for her, and this whole situation is completely insane, but I believe you love her. So I'm going to help you protect her from your psychotic grandfather, and in return, you're going to promise me that you'll never hurt her. I promise, Jaehyun said solemnly. Good, Zinel said. Now someone explain to me what the plan is, because I didn't drop my entire life and flee the country just to hide in a safe house forever. The plan, when they finally assembled it with Min Seo's help, was audacious and dangerous and had about 1,000 ways it could go wrong. They were going to confront Kim Sun-woo directly, in his own stronghold, and they were going to negotiate Nality and Zinel's safety by offering him something he wanted more than revenge. He wants you back, Min Seo explained to Jaehyun. Not because he loves you, but because you're his legacy, the only heir who's smart enough and ruthless enough to actually run the empire he built. Your father is competent, but you have your grandfather's mind, and Sun-woo knows it. He's been looking for an excuse to bring you back into the fold, and we're going to give him one. I'm not going back to that life, Jaehyun said flatly. Min Seo, I walked away for a reason. You're not going back permanently, Min Seo clarified. You're going to offer him a deal. You'll consult for the family. Use your skills to help them navigate certain business situations, in exchange for guaranteed safety for Nality and Zinel. You won't be the heir, you won't be involved in the criminal aspects, but you'll lend your intelligence when needed. It gives Sun-woo what he wants, which is access to your mind, without forcing you back into the world you escaped. And if he refuses? Nality asked. Then we go to war, Jaehyun said simply. I still have allies in the family, people who are tired of Sun-woo's methods, younger generation who want to see the Kims move toward legitimate business. If he won't negotiate, we'll force him out, stage a coup from within. That could get people killed, Nality said. People are already dying, Jaehyun said grimly. The Kim family's way of operating is not sustainable, Professor. Sooner or later, someone is going to take them down, and I'd rather it be us, doing it strategically, than some rival family doing it with maximum bloodshed. When did you become such a strategist? She asked softly. I always was one, he said. I just never wanted to use those skills for the family. But for you, to keep you safe, I'll use every weapon I have. They went to Kim Sun-woo's estate 3 days later, all 5 of them. Jaehyun, Nality, Zinel, Min Seo, and Mr. Choi, who had proven himself loyal to Jaehyun rather than to the Kim family as a whole. The estate was a fortress, hidden in the mountains outside Seoul, surrounded by security that would have made a military installation proud, and as they drove through multiple checkpoints, Nality felt her stomach churning with fear. Stay close to me, Jaehyun murmured to her and Zinel as they approached the main house. No matter what happens, stay close, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understood. We're not leaving you, Nality said. Then you'll follow my lead, he said, his voice hard. Professor, I know this world in ways you don't. I know how my grandfather thinks, how he operates. Trust me to navigate this. Kim Sun-woo was waiting for them in a traditional Korean sitting room. An old man who looked frail until you saw his eyes, sharp and calculating and utterly ruthless. Jaehyun, he said in Korean, not bothering to acknowledge anyone else in the room. You've come crawling back. Good. I'm not crawling, grandfather, Jaehyun replied in English, ensuring everyone could follow the conversation. I'm negotiating. You want something from me. I want something from you. Let's see if we can make a deal. I don't negotiate with deserters, Sun-woo said, switching to English himself. You abandoned your family, your duty, your legacy. Why would I give you anything? Because you're dying, Jaehyun said bluntly, and Nality saw Sun-woo's eyes narrow. You have maybe 2 years left, probably less, and you're terrified that everything you built will fall apart after you're gone, because father doesn't have the vision to maintain it, and your other sons are incompetent. You need me, grandfather. You need my mind, my strategic thinking, my ability to see patterns and anticipate consequences. And I'm willing to give you that for a price. What price? Sun-woo asked, his voice dangerous. Safety for Professor Mabeso and her daughter, Jaehyun said. Guaranteed absolute safety. No threats, no surveillance, no attempts to use them against me. You leave them alone, and I'll consult for the family. I won't come back full-time, I won't be your heir, but I'll help you with strategic decisions, with navigating the transition from criminal enterprise to legitimate business, with securing the family's future. You get my brain without owning my soul. Sunwoo studied him for a long moment, then turned his attention to Naledi. So you're the woman who corrupted my grandson, he said. The professor who seduced a boy young enough to be her son and convinced him to betray his blood. I didn't seduce anyone, Naledi said, forcing steel into her voice even though she was terrified. Your grandson made his own choices, and if you can't respect that, then you understand nothing about him at all. I understand that he was a perfect heir until you got your claws into him, Sunwoo said. He was a prisoner, Naledi corrected, and I helped him escape. If that makes me the villain in your story, then so be it. Sunwoo laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You have courage, I'll give you that. Foolish courage, but courage nonetheless. Do we have a deal or not, grandfather? Jaehyun asked, bringing the conversation back on track. Sunwoo was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options, and then he said, I want more than occasional consultation. I want you to groom your cousin Jin-ho to be your replacement. Teach him how you think, give him the tools he'll need to lead after I'm gone. Do that, help me ensure the family's future, and I'll leave your professor and her daughter alone. Jaehyun exchanged a glance with Min Seo, an entire conversation happening in that look, and then nodded. I can do that, he said. But I have conditions. Naledi and Zin'll get protection, real protection, not surveillance disguised as security. They get to live their lives without interference. And you stop the criminal operations, grandfather. All of them. I'll help you transition the family into legitimate business, but I won't help you perpetuate violence. That's not possible, Sunwoo said. The criminal operations are too deeply embedded. Then make it possible, Jaehyun said. You're the most powerful man in Seoul's underworld, grandfather. If you can't shut down your own operations, then you're not as powerful as you think you are. It was a calculated insult, a challenge to Sunwoo's pride, and Naledi held her breath waiting to see how the old man would react. Finally, Sunwoo smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. You've learned well, boy. Very well. I agree to your terms. We'll transition to legitimate business over the next 2 years. You'll train Jin-ho, and your women will be left alone. But if you betray me, if you try to use your access to destroy the family, I will kill everyone you love in front of you before I kill you. Are we clear? Perfectly clear, Jaehyun said. Then we have a deal, Sunwoo said, and extended his hand. Jaehyun shook it, and Naledi saw the moment her lover sold a piece of his soul to keep her safe, saw the weight of it settle onto his shoulders. They left the estate in tense silence, and it wasn't until they were back in the city, back in the relative safety of Naledi's apartment, that Jaehyun finally let himself break down. I'm sorry, he said, his head in his hands, sitting on the edge of her bed. I'm so sorry, Professor. I promised you freedom, and instead I've tied us both to my family forever. You saved our lives, she corrected, sitting beside him, pulling him against her. Jaehyun, you made an impossible choice and you chose us. That's not something to apologize for. I'll have to work with them, he said. I'll have to go to family meetings, help with business decisions, watch my cousin, and hope he doesn't turn into a monster. I'll have to be part of that world again, even if it's only peripherally. Then we'll deal with it together, she said. Jaehyun, I'm not going anywhere. Whatever you have to do to keep us safe, we'll handle it together. I love you, he said fiercely. God, Professor, I love you so much it hurts. I love you too, she said. And we're going to survive this. All of it. She believed it. She had to believe it, because the alternative was unthinkable. The first thing people noticed when they walked into the small cafe in Hongdae was the couple in the back corner, the beautiful young Korean man and the elegant black woman twice his age, sitting close together with their hands intertwined on the table between them, talking quietly like they were the only two people in the world. The second thing people noticed was the way they looked at each other, with their intensity that suggested they had been through something together, something that had forged a bond that nothing could break. Naledi had found a new position teaching Korean students online for a South African university, work she could do from anywhere in the world, and Jaehyun had started his MBA while fulfilling his obligations to his grandfather. Zin'll had decided to stay in Seoul, transferring her residency to a Korean hospital and learning the language with the same fierce determination her mother had shown. They were building something slowly and carefully, a life that belonged to them and not to the families or expectations or the weight of history. It wasn't perfect. Jae-hyun still had nightmares about the violence he had witnessed growing up, still struggled with the guilt of being complicit in his family's transition to legitimacy. Naledi still dealt with judgment from strangers who saw the age difference and made assumptions. Zinal was still adjusting to life in a country that didn't always welcome foreigners with open arms. But they were together, and they were free in all the ways that mattered, and that was enough. "What are you thinking about?" Jae-hyun asked, squeezing her hand. "I'm thinking about how far we've come," Naledi said. 6 months ago, people were shooting at us. Today, we're drinking coffee and planning what to make for dinner. It's surreal. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "Any of it?" She looked at him, at this young man who had risked everything for her, who loved her with a ferocity that still took her breath away, and smiled. "Not for a second," she said. "You." "Never," he said, and leaned across the table to kiss her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. But in the shadows of Seoul's underworld, in the halls of the Kim family estate, Kim Sun-woo sat in his office and watched security footage from that cafe, watched his grandson with the woman who had stolen him away, and smiled a smile that promised this story was far from over. Because the thing about deals with devils was that there was always a price, always a catch, always another move to make. And Sun-woo was a patient man. He had given them 6 months of peace, 6 months to believe they had won. Now it was time to collect what he was really owed. He picked up his phone, dialed a number he hadn't used in years, and when the voice on the other end answered, he said in Korean, "It's time. Bring me the girl." And somewhere in Hongdae, Naledi Mabeso laughed at something her lover said, completely unaware that the grandfather who had promised them safety had just ordered the kidnapping of her daughter, completely unaware that their war was only beginning, completely unaware that the real test of their love was still to come. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed Professor Naledi and Jae-hyun's journey so far. Who do you think is right and who is wrong in this complicated love story? Do you think they should have stayed apart for safety, or were they right to fight for their love? And what do you think will happen to Zinal now that Sun-woo has made his move? Share this story with someone who loves mafia forbidden romance. Let's see how far this story can travel. Part 2 is coming soon. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, love doesn't always make sense, but that doesn't make it any less real.